My childhood wasn't just a collection of memories, it was a blueprint, etched into my very being by the man who was my father. He was a symphony of warmth and unwavering principle. I can still hear the deep, resonant hum of his laughter filling our home, a sound that promised safety and boundless affection. His hands, strong and calloused from honest work, were always there to guide, to build, to reassure. He wasn't just a parent, he was the architect of my spirit, teaching me that problems were to be solved with clear eyes and decisive action, not lost in the endless churn of worry. Worry is just wasted energy, Chloe, he'd often say, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Action is where change happens. And I believed him, lived by it. At 29, I was a woman of action, pragmatic and grounded, utterly devoid of the tendency to whine or fret. That trait, I know now, was his greatest gift to me. He taught me the value of honesty, the power of integrity, and the sacredness of family. Our home was a sanctuary, brimming with open communication, laughter, and an unspoken trust that formed the bedrock of our lives. My mother, Emily, a woman of ethereal kindness and gentle spirit, blossomed under his adoration. He wasn't just a provider, he was a meticulous planner, especially when it came to her future. He worked diligently, invested wisely, and meticulously built a financial fortress around her, ensuring that should anything ever happen to him, her comfort, her security, her dignity would remain untouchable. He believed in preparing for every eventuality, a testament to his deep, abiding love. He often spoke of trusts and investments, detailing how Emily's legacy would be untouchable, even if he were gone. That knowledge, that profound security, was a constant, comforting hum beneath the surface of our lives. His passing, when it inevitably came, tore a raw, gaping hole in our world. The laughter in the house hushed, replaced by the hollow echo of absence. Emily, my vibrant, loving mother, retreated into a grief so profound it seemed to steal the very light from her eyes. She leaned on me, and I, on her, navigating the desolate landscape of loss together. The financial foundations my father had laid, however, remained solid, a testament to his foresight. They provided a practical comfort amidst the emotional devastation, a silent promise that at least one part of Emily's life would remain stable. It was into this fragile, altered world that Arthur entered. He was charming, of course, a man who possessed a polished veneer and an effortless charisma that drew people in. He met my mother through a grief support group, initially presenting himself as a sympathetic ear, a kind soul who understood her pain. He seemed to offer comfort, a steady presence in the chaos of her sorrow. He was respectable, handsome, and carried himself with an air of quiet confidence that spoke of success and stability. He spoke of investments and growth, of building a new, joyful future for them both. To Emily, still adrift in her grief, he was a lifeline, a beacon of hope. I, too, wanted to believe in him, wanted to see my mother find happiness again. I dismissed my initial, fleeting misgivings, the subtle dismissiveness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. But over the years, the cracks began to appear, slowly at first, then widening into gaping chasms. It was a creeping, insidious change, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching with the fierce protectiveness of a daughter. My mother's once easy laughter became strained, thin, often punctuated by a nervous, almost imperceptible sigh. Small luxuries that had once been part of their everyday lives, a spontaneous weekend trip, a new outfit, an evening out at her favorite restaurant, quietly disappeared, replaced by muttered explanations from Arthur about tightening the belt or unexpected market dips. Just market fluctuations, Emily, darling. Nothing to worry about, Arthur would say, his voice smooth as silk, yet carrying an underlying current of impatience. These new investments are taking a little longer to mature, but it's all for our future. He'd wave a dismissive hand, invalidating her quiet concerns, making her feel foolish for even voicing them. You know you're not good with numbers, my love. Leave it to me. And Emily, trusting by nature, and still recovering from a grief that had left her vulnerable, would slowly retreat, her brow furrowed with unspoken worry. I started noticing the discrepancies, the subtle tightenings. A strange, unusually high bill arriving that my mother couldn't explain. A phone call from a friend asking why Emily had suddenly pulled out of a long-planned trip. My sharp eye, my father's legacy of common sense, began to piece together a disquieting puzzle. I saw the way Emily's eyes clouded with a nameless anxiety, the way she would subtly wring her hands when Arthur spoke of finances. I'd try to approach her gently, to ask if everything was okay, but she'd always defend him, or simply dismiss my concerns as Chloe being overly dramatic. He knows what he's doing, she'd insist, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. My gut screamed that something was profoundly wrong. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was something darker, something predatory. The man who had promised my mother a new chapter of happiness was, I increasingly suspected, meticulously, systematically, dismantling everything my father had painstakingly built for her. He was isolating her, gaslighting her, and slowly bleeding her dry, and the scent of that rot was growing stronger, settling like a suffocating shroud over my mother's life. The subtle dismissals, the patronizing reassurances, they were all part of a calculated game, a carefully orchestrated deception designed to keep Emily compliant and blind. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that soon, that game would have to end. My father's meticulously planned financial fortress, built with such love and foresight, was being meticulously dismantled, brick by precious brick. It started with small amounts disappearing from accounts, explained away as administrative fees, or realignments. Then, the figures grew larger, masked by Arthur's increasingly complex financial jargon and his patient, condescending explanations that always left Emily nodding, bewildered but trusting. I'd catch glimpses of bank statements left carelessly on the kitchen counter, unusual transfers, withdrawals far too large for their stated expenses. When I'd try to gently question Emily, her answers were always vague, laced with Arthur's reassurances. Arthur says it's for a new venture, dear, very promising. He's just diversifying. Or, oh, that. He says it's just moving funds between accounts for better interest rates. Her voice, once so clear and confident in financial matters, thanks to my father's tutelage, now held a nervous tremor, a desperate attempt to believe her husband's words. Arthur's gaslighting was a slow poison, dripping into Emily's mind, eroding her confidence, making her doubt her own reality. You worry too much, Emily. It's not good for your health. Your memory isn't what it used to be, my love. I explained this perfectly just last week. He'd speak to her as if she were a child, sweet but firm, always dismissing her burgeoning anxieties as unfounded hysteria. He'd control access to financial documents, claiming he was handling everything, so she wouldn't be burdened. He isolated her subtly from friends who might ask too many questions, from family members like me who saw the fear flickering in her eyes. My mother, once so vibrant and engaged with the world, began to shrink, her light dimming under the weight of his psychological manipulation. She was caught in a web of denial and confusion, trapped by the very man she had welcomed into her life. The financial drain became a choking grip, tightening slowly, cutting off the air from her once secure world. I saw it in the small ways. Emily hesitated before buying groceries, she stopped replacing worn-out clothes, she cancelled her beloved gardening club membership saying she didn't have the time. These were not Emily. This was a woman being controlled, her life's blood slowly, relentlessly, being drained. My calls to her grew more frequent, my questions more pointed, always met with Arthur's smooth deflection or Emily's nervous attempts to change the subject. The situation escalated from grim to truly desperate when my mother's health, already fragile, took a sudden, frightening turn. She developed a severe, debilitating respiratory illness that required immediate, specialized medical treatment. The doctors were clear, the treatment was expensive, but absolutely crucial for her recovery and quality of life. Without it, her condition would rapidly worsen. I remember the day Emily finally admitted how scared she was, her voice a thin whisper over the phone. "Chloe, darling, the doctors, they said I need this new procedure. It's so much money, Arthur says, he says the funds aren't liquid right now. The desperation in her voice was palpable, a stark contrast to Arthur's usual placating tones. She sounded lost, terrified. I rushed to their house. The air was thick with tension, Emily's face pale and drawn. Arthur sat opposite her, an impenetrable mask of false concern. It's just unfortunate timing, Emily, he said, his voice laced with patronizing sympathy. All our assets are tied up in the new ventures. Completely illiquid. I explained this, darling. We simply don't have immediate access to that kind of capital. He spread his hands, a picture of helplessness. But Arthur, Emily pleaded, her voice cracking, the doctor said it's urgent. We talked about it. My father, he left me that special account, for emergencies. Hope flickered in her eyes, a desperate, fading flame. Arthur's smile didn't reach his eyes. That account, Emily, has been diversified into very aggressive, high-yield opportunities. It's not just sitting there. You don't want it to just sit there, do you? Inflation, darling, it eats away at stagnant capital. He dismissed her concerns, her very illness, with financial jargon and a cold, almost cruel, logic. He turned to me, his gaze hardening. Chloe, perhaps you could advise your mother not to panic. These things take time. We must be patient. Patience? My mother was struggling to breathe, her body failing, and he spoke of patience and illiquid assets. My father had built that emergency fund specifically for this. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a furious heat. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a deliberate, calculated refusal. He wasn't just mismanaging money, he was denying my mother her right to health, her right to life itself, all to protect his own secrets, his own stolen gains. The man who had vowed to cherish and protect her was actively choosing to let her suffer, perhaps even to let her die, rather than relinquish a single penny of what he had drained from her. The betrayal was complete. That conversation echoed in my mind, a horrifying symphony of his lies and my mother's quiet despair. I saw Arthur's eyes, devoid of genuine concern, just calculation. I saw my mother's defeat, the light fading in her fragile gaze. And in that moment, all my father's lessons coalesced into one unyielding truth: Arthur was not merely a poor financial manager. He was a predator, slowly suffocating my mother, and the time for observation was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. The words Arthur had spoken, the chilling indifference in his eyes as my mother gasped for breath, refusing her vital medical treatment, they echoed in my mind like a death knell. Patience, he'd said. Illiquid assets. My mother was dying, and he spoke of interest rates. It was a cold, calculated cruelty that stripped away any last vestige of doubt I harbored. This wasn't mismanagement, it was malice. My father's voice, a steady whisper from the past, cut through the fog of my fury. Action, Chloe. Action is where change happens. I stood there, watching the defeated slump of Emily's shoulders, the flicker of hope dying in her eyes, and a decision solidified within me, cold and hard as steel. There would be no more waiting. No more delicate probing. If Arthur would not provide, I would. I left their house that afternoon, my mind already racing, plotting. My savings, built carefully over years from my nursing salary, were substantial. They represented my own future, my hard-earned independence. But in that moment, they were merely a tool, a weapon against the immediate threat to my mother's life. My father had taught me the value of provision, of standing tall for those you love. This was not a sacrifice, it was a non-negotiable imperative. The next morning, I transferred $16,000, enough to cover Emily's entire critical treatment, and then some, into her personal checking account. I didn't tell Arthur. I went directly to my mother, finding her frail and withdrawn, huddled on the sofa with a blanket wrapped tightly around her. She looked smaller, defeated. "Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm, sitting beside her. "I've taken care of it. The money for your treatment. It's in your account." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, disbelieving. "Chloe. What are you saying?" "I transferred it this morning," I explained, pulling out my phone to show her the confirmation. $16,000. Enough for everything. You need this treatment. Don't worry about Arthur. Just focus on getting better." A choked sob escaped her. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down her face. She pulled me into a tight embrace, her grip surprisingly strong. "Oh, Chloe. My wonderful girl. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know what I would do," she pulled back, her eyes shining with renewed, fragile hope. "I'll tell Arthur. He'll be so relieved." A cold dread coiled in my stomach at the mention of his name, but I forced a reassuring smile. "Just make sure the money goes directly to the hospital, Mom. No delays." I wanted to warn her, to tell her to guard it, but her face was alight with such fragile relief, I couldn't bring myself to inject more fear. She clung to that hope, and I had given it to her. Days turned into a week. Emily sounded a little more optimistic on the phone, telling me she was finalizing the appointment with the specialist. A tiny flicker of relief sparked within me. Perhaps Arthur, knowing the funds were available, would simply let it happen. Perhaps my intervention would bypass his insidious control. Then came the call. Emily's voice, thin and trembling, ripped through my calm. "Chloe, the hospital called. They said the payment didn't go through." My blood ran cold. "What? What do you mean, Mom?" "It's there. I put $16,000 in your account myself." "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice laced with terror. "Arthur said he moved it to a higher-yield savings account for a day or two, to maximize the interest before transferring it to the hospital. He said it was just a technicality, to make sure it was efficient. But now it's gone, Chloe. It's not in the savings account either. He says he must have lost it in a bad investment. He looks so confused, he says it's just gone." "Lost it." The words hung in the air, a sickening lie. Arthur didn't lose money. He made it disappear. He had taken my $16,000, meant for my mother's life, and made it vanish into his own abyss of deceit. My carefully earned savings, my direct lifeline to Emily's health, stolen. Not just from me, but from her. This wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was a direct assault on her very existence. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "don't worry. I'm coming over. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to Arthur about this until I get there." I drove through the familiar streets in a blur, my mind a storm of white-hot rage and a chilling clarity. This wasn't about a passive threat anymore. This was a direct, active violation. Arthur had gone beyond passive draining, he had outright stolen funds earmarked for life-saving medical care. He had taken my generous, loving act, twisted it, and used it to inflict even deeper harm. The image of my father's face, etched with honesty and integrity, flashed before my eyes, then Arthur's sneering indifference. This was a war, and he had just crossed the line. When I arrived, Emily was weeping silently on the sofa, clutching a tissue. Arthur sat rigidly in his armchair, a pathetic portrait of feigned confusion and distress. "Chloe, darling, it's a disaster. A terrible investment. I can't believe it. The money just vanished." He wrung his hands, his eyes darting nervously. I didn't dignify his performance with a response. My gaze was fixed on Emily's tear-streaked face. She was drowning, and he had thrown her an anchor made of lead. The love for her, raw and fierce, surged through me, eclipsing everything else. My father's lessons, his unwavering values, now felt like an unyielding current pushing me forward. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. This was about vengeance for every tear my mother had shed, every ounce of dignity he had stolen, every breath he had made harder for her to take. The drive back to my own apartment was a blur of furious certainty. The raw, guttural pain of seeing my mother's devastated face, coupled with the audacious theft of the $16,000 I'd provided for her medical treatment, had cauterized all hesitation. The time for observation, for subtle nudges, for polite questioning, was over. Arthur had stolen from Emily's very breath, from my very hand. My father's lesson, that action is the only antidote to fear, now echoed like a battle cry in my mind. My apartment, usually a haven of calm, became my war room. I didn't waste a single moment succumbing to despair or self-pity. My mind, sharp and analytical, immediately shifted into investigative mode. Arthur thought he was clever, a master manipulator. But he had underestimated a daughter fueled by love and a lifetime of training in logical, decisive action. He had underestimated Chloe. My first move was to secure anything tangible my mother might have around her. I called Emily, instructing her, as calmly as I could, to gather any old bank statements, utility bills, or financial documents that Arthur might have left lying around, anything that looked official. I told her not to confront him, just to say she was cleaning out old paperwork. She agreed, her voice still shaky, but a faint spark of hope rekindled by my unwavering resolve. When I received a shoebox overflowing with documents the next day, it was a messy trove. Most of it was mundane, but mixed in were statements showing inexplicable transactions, credit card bills with astronomical balances that Emily would never incur, and investment reports filled with jargon that seemed designed to confuse. Arthur had been sloppy, arrogant in his belief that Emily wouldn't notice, or that I wouldn't care enough to dig. He hadn't accounted for a daughter who remembers every detail, every promise. My desk quickly became a sprawling network of papers, sticky notes, and a digital spreadsheet that tracked every suspicious outflow. I worked tirelessly, fueled by strong coffee and an unyielding fury. I cross-referenced dates, account numbers, and payee names. I noticed patterns, large withdrawals often followed by vague entries, payments to companies I'd never heard of, or significant sums transferred to accounts that weren't Emily's. The mismanagement was clearly a sophisticated, deliberate drain. It wasn't just money disappearing, it was being diverted. The critical piece of the puzzle, however, remained elusive, the $16,000 I'd wired. How could it just vanish from Emily's account? Arthur's story of a bad investment was a transparent lie. My own bank confirmed the transfer to Emily's personal checking account. But from there, its trail went cold, disappearing into the labyrinth Arthur had constructed. I suspected he hadn't just lost it, he'd taken it. The sheer audacity, the callousness of stealing money meant for medical treatment, not at me. I knew I needed a deeper level of insight, a guide through the murky waters of financial fraud. I thought of Alex, an old university friend, now a forensic accountant. He was brilliant, quiet, with an almost uncanny ability to sniff out anomalies. I called him, carefully outlining a hypothetical situation involving a family member. He listened, his silence thoughtful, then agreed to look at the anonymized documents I could provide. Meeting Alex was a turning point. I laid out the jumbled mess of statements, the confusing investment reports, and explained the timeline, culminating in the disappearance of the $16,000. Alex's eyes, usually calm, narrowed as he meticulously reviewed everything. After an hour of intense silence, punctuated only by the rustle of paper, he looked up. "Chloe," he said, his voice low, "this isn't mismanagement. This is textbook financial abuse. And outright fraud. These investments are shell companies, funneling money into accounts that aren't Emily's. This loss of the $16,000. It was never invested. It was likely transferred immediately to one of Arthur's personal, hidden accounts or directly to pay off a significant debt he had. He pointed to a series of dated transfers. See here. Your mother's money is going out, often to these phantom companies. And here, he tapped a recent statement, just days after your $16,000 hit your mother's account, a corresponding large sum, almost exactly $16,000, vanished into one of these shell accounts before being rapidly dispersed. He probably used it to cover something urgent. He didn't lose it, he stole it, Chloe. From her, and from you. The cold dread solidified into concrete rage. It was worse than I thought. Not just a drain, but active, predatory theft, brazenly conducted while my mother lay vulnerable. Alex's expertise gave form to my suspicions, providing the professional language and the clear, damning pathways of Arthur's deceit. He helped me identify the key transactions, pinpoint the illicit accounts, and even recognize patterns of what appeared to be hidden credit lines or undeclared assets. The file I compiled grew thicker, heavier, filled with undeniable proof. Bank statements, forged signatures, records of hidden debts, shell company registrations, and the damning trail of my $16,000. This wasn't just suspicion, it was a dossier of undeniable guilt. Every piece of paper, every digital trail, was a step closer to justice. I didn't feel triumph yet, only a fierce, cold determination. The hunt had been meticulous, quiet. The confrontation, however, would be anything but. Arthur had thought he could hide in the shadows, but I was about to drag him, and all his ugly truths, into the harsh, unforgiving light. The file lay heavy on my desk, a physical manifestation of Arthur's deceit. Inside, every piece of paper, every printout, every spreadsheet entry was a meticulously crafted nail for his coffin. Bank statements highlighted in neon yellow, tracing the insidious bleed of Emily's inheritance into shell corporations and undisclosed personal accounts. Loan documents, emblazoned with Emily's clumsily forged signature, details of the $16,000 I'd wired for her medical treatment, spirited away into one of Arthur's opaque investment ventures, only to vanish into the black hole of his personal debts. There was even a faded printout of an email from Emily's trusted family lawyer, detailing the untouched inheritance left by my father, directly contradicting Arthur's vague claims of market fluctuations. My heart throbbed with a cold, clear resolve. The hunt was over. The reckoning was about to begin. I chose the precise moment. Not a volatile confrontation born of raw emotion, but a cold, surgical exposure. I arranged a family financial review, a seemingly innocuous suggestion to Emily, whom I subtly nudged, telling her it was time to get a clear picture of their assets after all the market changes. Arthur, ever confident in his ability to manipulate Emily, readily agreed, no doubt relishing the opportunity to spin another elaborate tale. I also invited my father's oldest friend, David Chen, a man whose quiet integrity and sharp legal mind commanded respect, framing it as a casual catch-up and a chance to get a second opinion on their portfolio. Arthur, always eager to impress, agreed without hesitation. The setting was Emily's sunlit living room, transformed into a stage for the unveiling. Emily sat nervously on the sofa, her hands clasped, a faint tremor running through her. Arthur, resplendent in a crisp linen shirt, projected an air of confident benevolence, already poised to launch into his usual jargon-filled reassurances. David Chen sat quietly in an armchair, his presence a calm, watchful anchor. I, however, felt a singular focus, a quiet fury that burned steady and bright. I held a sleek leather portfolio, its contents the culmination of my relentless weeks of digging. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake raging inside me. Mom and I felt it was time for a transparent look at the family finances, especially with the recent difficulties. My gaze flickered to Arthur, who offered a condescending, reassuring nod. "Of course, Chloe," Arthur chimed in, leaning forward. "Always happy to provide clarity. Emily worries unnecessarily sometimes, bless her heart." These investment portfolios can be complex. He reached for a stack of his own, neatly prepared, glossy reports, his usual smokescreen. I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. Thank you, Arthur, but I have my own presentation. I placed my portfolio on the coffee table. Mom, you recall how you expressed concern about the significant withdrawals from your accounts over the past few years? And your surprise at the lack of returns on Arthur's ventures. Emily nodded, her eyes wide, darting from me to Arthur. Arthur's face remained placid, but a subtle tension gripped his jaw. Well, I continued, opening the portfolio, I've compiled a more detailed account. These are your bank statements, Mom, showing transfers, not to shared accounts, but to accounts solely in Arthur's name, or to shell companies he established. This one, I pointed to a highlighted entry, a transfer of $75,000 to AJ Holdings, a company registered to Arthur's private P.O. box address. Arthur's calm began to crack. Chloe, darling, those are internal transfers. Perfectly legitimate. Part of a larger diversification strategy that your mother simply doesn't understand. He tried to wave it off, but his voice was rising, a telltale tremor in his hand. David Chen, who had been silently observing, cleared his throat. Shell companies, Arthur. For internal transfers. His tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. I ignored Arthur's sputtering. And this, I continued, sliding over another document, is a loan agreement for $200,000, taken out against Mom's inherited property. Signed by Emily Davies. A signature that, upon closer inspection, doesn't quite match Mom's genuine one. I held up a magnified comparison. Looks suspiciously like a forgery, wouldn't you say, Arthur? Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Arthur. What is she talking about? Arthur's face contorted. This is ludicrous. Chloe, you're delusional. You always were, weren't you? Jealous of my success, trying to poison your mother against me. His voice was now loud, his charade dissolving into raw aggression. His eyes, once so charming, now burned with a desperate, cornered animal's fury. Am I, Arthur? I countered, my voice unwavering, a cold steel against his rising panic. Let's talk about the $16,000 I transferred for Mom's medical treatment, then. The money that mysteriously vanished after you said you'd move it to a higher yield savings account. I pushed forward printouts of Emily's bank statements, my transfer coming in, and then, a few days later, an outgoing transfer of precisely $16,000 to an account previously identified by Alex as one of Arthur's hidden personal accounts. This isn't a lost investment, Arthur. This is theft. Direct. Brazen. Unforgivable. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing. Her gaze, filled with dawning horror, swiveled from the damning papers to Arthur's contorted face. She saw it all now, the years of subtle manipulation, the dismissive words, the vague excuses, the growing anxiety she couldn't name. It was all a monstrous lie. Arthur's facade didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He sprang to his feet, overturning the coffee table in his rage. You little witch. You think you can ruin me? You've already ruined yourself, Arthur, David Chen interrupted, his voice cutting like ice. The evidence Chloe has presented is overwhelming. Financial fraud, potential forgery, outright theft of funds meant for medical care. You've done quite enough to yourself. Emily began to sob, not in despair, but in a mixture of terror and fierce, belated anger. She looked at Arthur, her eyes wide with a pain that ripped through me. It's all true, isn't it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You took everything. Even my medical money. Arthur lunged forward, perhaps intending to silence me, or Emily, but David Chen was quicker, stepping between us, a silent barrier. Arthur stood there, panting, defeated, his well-tailored shirt rumpled, his face a mask of sweating desperation. The charming, respectable man was gone, replaced by a snarling, cornered thief. His eyes, wild and unfocused, darted around the room, finding no escape. He was exposed, stripped bare, left with nothing but his ugly truth. The monster had finally been dragged into the light. The silence after Arthur's outburst was heavier than any words. Emily stared at him, her eyes wide with a profound, agonizing realization. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, was a monstrous illusion. Every dismissive word, every vanished penny, every whispered fear that Arthur had so expertly extinguished, it all coalesced into a single, devastating truth. Then, a shudder ran through her, not of fear, but of righteous, searing anger. The denial, a comfort for so long, finally shattered, replaced by a clarity that was both horrifying and liberating. "Get out," Emily whispered, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every syllable. "Get out of my house. Now." Arthur, still wild-eyed and panting, seemed to shrink. He darted a look at David Chen, then at me, finding no allies, no escape. With a final, guttural snarl of defeat, he stumbled towards the door, his once impeccable suit now a testament to his unraveling. The slam of the front door vibrated through the silent living room, leaving behind only the echo of his cruelty and the heavy scent of spent rage. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal action. Emily, with a newfound resolve that surprised even me, wasted no time. Her grief for the life Arthur had stolen from her fueled a quiet, steely determination. She signed the papers, initiated divorce proceedings, and, most importantly, pressed criminal charges against Arthur for financial fraud and the specific theft of the $16,000 medical funds. My carefully compiled dossier, complete with detailed bank statements, intercepted communications, and Alex's forensic analysis, became the foundation of their case. I worked tirelessly alongside David, providing every piece of evidence, every detail. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a crusade. My father's principles of integrity and justice guided my every move. Arthur had preyed on vulnerability, on trust. He had undermined the very foundations my father had built. I would ensure that his own foundations crumbled entirely. Arthur, predictably, attempted to fight back. He hired expensive lawyers, launched smear campaigns against me, trying to paint me as a vindictive, jealous stepdaughter. But his arguments were hollow, his lies transparent. My evidence was too meticulously gathered, too irrefutable. The discovery process unveiled more of his hidden debts, his lavish spending, and the vast sums he had funneled into his own failed ventures and personal accounts. His carefully constructed facade, once so convincing, was now a tattered shred, exposed for the world to see. The verdict came quickly: guilty. Guilty on all counts. The judge's pronouncement was a chilling echo in the silent courtroom, consigning Arthur to years behind bars for financial fraud and theft. But the prison sentence was only part of his reckoning. The civil suit, fueled by the criminal conviction, ensured his complete financial obliteration. Through legal motions and asset forfeiture, Arthur was systematically stripped of every penny he had gained, every asset he had stolen, and every hidden account he possessed. His reputation was ruined, his social standing obliterated. The man who had entered our lives with so much polish, so much promise, left the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on his back and the looming prospect of a prison cell. He was left with exactly what he deserved, absolutely nothing. My role in Arthur's downfall was not one of gloating revenge. When I walked out of that courthouse, a quiet, profound satisfaction settled deep in my bones. It wasn't the thrill of inflicting pain, but the deep, abiding peace that comes from seeing justice served, from righting a terrible wrong. My father, who had believed so fiercely in truth and integrity, would have been proud. I had protected my mother, not just from financial ruin, but from the insidious psychological chains Arthur had forged around her. Emily's healing was a slow, tender process. The financial accounts, once emptied, slowly began to recover thanks to the recovered funds and my continued guidance. More importantly, her spirit began to mend. The light returned to her eyes, the worry lines softened, and her laughter, once hesitant, bubbled freely again. She began to rebuild her life, rediscovering old hobbies, reconnecting with friends Arthur had alienated, and embracing a newfound independence. I knew the scars would remain, but they were now scars of survival, not of victimhood. Arthur's shadow had been banished. In its place, the warmth of a loving bond between a mother and daughter, forged anew in the crucible of betrayal and triumph, shone brighter than ever. My father's legacy wasn't just in the money Arthur had tried to steal, it was in the strength, the determination, and the unwavering pursuit of justice he had instilled in me, allowing me to bring his spirit to bear against the darkness, and truly set my mother free.